In the last two videos, we learned about some of the basic concepts of classes. In this video, we are going to learn about subclassing using extents and a few more concepts. So, there is a concept of extents using which you can inherit various properties and methods from another class to a different class. Okay, so for example, let's say there is a class person and it has a few properties, methods. Then if you are trying to create a new class and let's say that class wants to have these two properties, this property and this method, then you don't need to duplicate the code. In fact, you can inherit all these directly there. So for example, now this employee class extends person, which means that all the properties and methods which are available in person, they will be also available for employee. And on top of that, I am defining some new properties or methods in this class also. Okay, so now if I instantiate this employee class and create an object of employee, then that object will have obviously details, but apart from that, that object will also have info and name available into them. So let's understand this by an example. Let's take the same example. So let's say class person is there, and we have some name. Okay, and then we also have info, and info we are simply going to print. Let's say what is the name of the person. So name is this dot name. Fine. And now obviously if you simply create a person class, person object, then you can obviously get all the details. So for example, there is no need to console log, but it is all because it is already there in p.info. So simply p.info, simply I'll do, and then obviously I have to do a new operator. Unfortunately, without new operator, the class instantiation cannot be done. Okay, so you can see that this thing works, right? And this is obviously we learned already about this, right? Now we are going a bit deep, in which we are going to create a separate class called, let's say, employee, and this employee class extends all the properties from person, and so it does also inherit the methods also. Now let's say only this much, nothing, we do nothing inside this, then also it works. You can see that if I simply change this to employee, you can see still it works. And if it is an employee, just better to name it some e variable, that is fine. However, and obviously e dot so other things like let's say e dot name you want to get, then obviously employee name is Alex. Now you can see that we did not give any name directly to employee, but since it is inheriting person and the name is defined in person, and that's why we can get the name from the employee object also. Okay, that is fine. What if we want to add, but there's no point in doing this, right? If we wanted to do just this much, then directly we would have created object from person class only. But the entire point of inheriting this person object, person class, is that we can have some more properties or methods defined in employee class separately, which is in this case we are having details, right? So this details method can have something like simply details. So it is basically same only, just let's say instead of name you are using details, nothing else, just to show that there is a different method. Other than that, we are not doing anything else. Okay, now obviously this will run, but now you can also do something like e dot details. And if you would have created instance from person, then obviously this details will not be available. But Now employee object created from employee class will have name, info, and also have details also. Okay, so you can see that name, info, and details is also working fine. So this is called inheritance, also called subclassing, and the keyword is extends. Using extends keyword, you can do something like this. Okay, so that should be fine. Now let's take something more about subclassing. So what happens if so there's a concept of constructor we already know, like in this thing, right? Now there is also so what if you say that, yeah, why I'm not using constructor anywhere, so let's try to use constructor here. If you try to do, and let's say I don't do anything inside that constructor, okay, just an empty constructor, you'll see that you're getting an error, something like must call super constructor in derived class. So it turns out that if you're creating if you're not doing anything, if you're not doing anything at all, no constructor, then it's fine. Automatically it will call the constructor, and it will call the constructor of the superclass. What is the superclass? Superclass is the class which is which we extended, the class which we extended, right? So there are many terminologies. The person can be called a superclass. The employee can be called a derived class. There is also another terminology where the person can be called parent class, employee can be called child class. So these are the terminologies, but any of them you can use, that is fine. Now yeah, so now we also know that this name, we could have also written this also in constructor, right? So we could have done something like this, and inside this I should use this dot name, right? And this is exactly the same thing, right? So it will create while the object is constructed, it will create a new property, right? That should be fine, right? So still it works, but still here also, if we just even if you use a constructor, then it is you can see that we are getting error. And to prove the point that that is being called, so even if I'm creating an instance of employee, this constructor is called internally, and that's how these things are created. Otherwise, there is how Alex is assigned, right? Obviously you can just have a quick log here, and that also works fine. You can see that as soon as you create an employee class, employee object, automatically this constructor is called. That is fine. Now the problem is that you cannot do something like this empty. You cannot have an empty constructor. If in case you wanted to do something in the constructor of this class, then there's a particular way of using this. Simply having an empty constructor, or simply doing directly something like whatever you want to do here, this dot some new thing, some new thing, let's say department of the employee is there, and you pass them department or whatever. So something like this will not work actually directly if you try to do something like that. There is a thing which is called super constructor. So when a class is there, and then in the employee, if you want to use the constructor, then you have to call something called super, which means that if you don't do anything, then automatically it is done. But if you're manually writing your constructor, then you have to also manually call that above constructor. So when you call this super when you call this function, this is basically a keyword. When you call this super, then it is a way of saying that while you are trying to initialize employee, the first thing you have to do is that initialize person. And I already know that the person is the actually the parent class, right? So simply writing super will call actually this thing. So this is the way, and now you will see that it will not give any error. And now if you use something like this, then now you can do whatever in this whatever you wanted to do in this thing, anything. So that should be working fine. That will come soon. But For now, let's take one another example where rather than hard coding this name, let's use a particular name. So let's say name. Okay, and obviously if I directly create person, then I should pass that. And let's say that right now I don't have a constructor, right? And then I need to pass here, right? So let's say I pass the name Alex, and you can clearly see that it works fine. So whatever the arguments to employee you passed, even if there is no constructor defined inside the employee class, but automatically with these arguments, automatically this person's constructor is called, and that's why you can see that everything works fine. Okay. However, however, if you try to do something like this, you define your own constructor, then you need to change something, right? Because I passed this argument here, but that argument is not being used, right? Now since you are defining your own constructor, so now it becomes your responsibility. Earlier, if you are not defining the constructor, JavaScript itself took care of everything and automatically passed these arguments to here, right? But now since you are defining your own constructor, it becomes your responsibility to properly pass this to the super constructor, which means that now you see that it is undefined. Why it is undefined? Because even if I pass this Alex, I did not use it, right? And this super is called with no arguments, and that's why this name is undefined, and that's why this dot name is undefined. That's why the whole thing, instead of Alex, it became undefined. So what we have to do is that we have to properly use that name and pass that name, and now everything works fine. Okay. So that is the same thing mentioned here, that if something like this constructor is there and you are defining your own constructor, then you have to utilize all the things which you are needing for everything to work. Okay. Now, super constructor must be called in the derived class before accessing this, which means that let's say you have a person class and you extended it, and then let's say you're using some additional attribute in the employee. Okay, and for that you might need to define new attributes or something like let's say I'm not only interested in name, rather I'm also interested in, let's say, department, and department is, let's say, IT, and that department can be passed from here, and then you can properly define, and this is employee specific thing, and that's why it is defined only in the employee. That is fine. And let's print that department also in the details thing. So this dot department, and now you can see that when I try to print, then I get in the details I get name and department both. Okay, but there is a rule here. If you are using this here, then it must be used only after you have called the super constructor. If you try to do something like this before calling super, if you try to access this or something, then it will again throw you an error that must call the super constructor in the derived class before accessing this. Okay, and that's why you must use this only after calling the super thing. Okay, so yeah, that's what is mentioned here. Apart from that, there's one more thing, that you may also extend function based classes. In the earlier videos we discussed a thing that that right now employee is a class which is extending another class person, right? But and we also said that earlier in earlier videos that you can sort of simulate person using constructor functions, right? Which is basically which creates an object using constructor calls. Okay, so let's try that. Instead of this, we will try to simulate exactly the same thing but using functions, and we already know that, right? We have to do something like simply we have to create a function which is having the same name, what do we want, and And in this the properties will be as it is defined. This dot name is equal to name, and this is a function, right? This is not a class, so I have to obviously use parents, and this name will be passed here. This is fine. So attributes can be directly constructed, like it's like a basically it's a constructor function, right? But apart from that, we also learned that we can also add methods, attach methods using prototype. So person dot prototype dot info. So we want an info method, so we'll attach this info method in the prototype, and then we will use the same thing, something like this. So you can see that this thing is sort of a simulation of this thing using functions. And interestingly, if you run this, then you can see that still it works, right? So you're extending person is not a class, it is a function, but you can see that while hovering also it is saying like it's a class, but that might be because after extends generally there is a class, that's why it is thinking that it is a class, but it is not a class, right? It is simply a function. More importantly, it has to be a constructor function. It cannot be a normal function. If you are using a normal function, then you will not be able to do that, right? Because you cannot use this dot like that, so properties cannot be instantiated and defined there. However, now having understood that it can be done like this, now let's try to use some different things. So what if this thing right now it is a constructor function, which is like a function based classes also, you can say. But what if this is not even a constructor function? What if it is a plain object? Then obviously then you cannot do it, right? So the idea is that if this is a plain object, so simply let's say name, I'm not interested, so let's say name is directly, I'm not even interested in super, that is just name directly used here, and there's no extending thing going on right now. Okay, and just delete everything. What we are going to do, so obviously this thing will work fine, except that e.info is not available, so this will throw an error. You have to remove e.info for now, but somehow we still need to do some sort of inheritance, but in a different manner. Rather than extends, there is another way that you can have a plain object, and then you can use something called object.setPrototypeOf. So set prototype of is another way, which is not a common way, but then also it is another way of using inherited values from other objects. Okay, so in this case obviously we are not inheriting from class, but simply from other objects. So what we can do is that we can do something like const, let's say person, but now this person is simply an object, nothing else. But here interestingly we can define and we know that this is a ES6 syntax, right? So it is equivalent to this thing, we know, right? So this is just a shortcut. And in this we can very well write whatever we had earlier. So name and this dot or for example let's say yeah, so that should be fine. That should be fine. This dot name should be fine. It's just that this does not make any sense right now. How this person will be called, that is also not clear right now. It will become clear. So somehow we have to use this method, we have to attach this method, info method, in with employee, so that we can use something like e.info. Right now we cannot do, right? So because info is not at all here, right? Somehow we have to attach this info. There's a way of doing that, and that way is something like this. This is a object dot, there is something called set prototype of, and in that you pass, let's say, employee dot prototype, and in the second argument you can see that you can pass the thing which you want to attach. the object which you want to attach. So person. So you see the syntax. You see the syntax. Person object has this function info. I am trying to attach that object to the prototype of employee. Now we'll not go into these details, much details, because prototype is a slightly advanced concept, but for now you can understand that we know that prototype is used in instantiation, right? So classes are there, so here we are going to use instantiated way, only we are going to use this employee thing, right? So what this will do, that in the prototype of employee we are going to attach person's signature also, and the person's signature contains info, and that's why now employee will also contain that signature, which was whatever the properties and or whatever the things, functions, methods, etc., were defined in this object. Okay, and now if you run, then obviously nothing has changed, so it will run. But now if you try to run e.info, then you can see that that is also running fine. So which means that e has now info also, and that is exactly because of this line only, e.set prototype of. Okay, so that should be fine. One small thing is there, that you might be thinking that, yeah, I firstly need to do this and then I create object and then only things work, right? Turns out that if you simply do something like this, that let's say you created an object is already created, and till here, even till here, e does not have info, right? So you can see that e does not have info, so it will throw error. Without this it is working fine, but just before you using that, even before that also, you can attach this prototype to the prototype, and then you can see that this works fine. And then Alex is exactly the same thing which was passed from here. So you can think of it like it's not instance related, it modifies the prototype, and once the prototype is modified, then all the objects which are created from that prototype, that is also internally that is attached. So even if you do it here, then also it's available, right? So it works like that also. Okay, so that should be fine. Next, in case of the same method names are there, so right now we can see that, yeah, so let's get into simpler case. So rather than having this, let's have a plain class, because we have understood about about the normal function cases, but let's take the simple case. And yeah, and let's use properly super thing. So let's say this is constructor, and then you can use super name, fine. And then we don't need these things, right? Super, yeah. So actually we need to add extends also here, extends person, and then it should work fine, right? So yeah, this is expected, right? This was the earlier thing which we did. However, the thing which we are discussing right now is that what if so right now e.info, e.details, they are different, and if I simply use e.info, then obviously that thing will be called here, this thing will be called, right? But what if this details is also info? If this is also info and this is also info, if I call e.info, then whether this thing will be called or this thing will be called. Turns out that this thing will be called. So that's what it is mentioned here, that in case the same method name is there, which means that there is a conflict of the name, then the child's method takes precedence over the parent's method. So this is the child, right? Employee is the child, person is the parent. So when we run this, then we can see that this details thing, this thing is printing rather than this name thing, which means that this function is being called. Okay, so that is what, if both are same, then this thing will be called. Okay, apart from that, the super keyword is used to call corresponding methods of superclass, and this is an advantage over prototype based mechanism, where in the prototype based inheritance something like this cannot be done, but something like this, so for example, let's say this is details right now. Just get into a different name, but we can see that, yeah, just details is being called, right? Is there a way that I can call methods of superclass or parent class from inside the methods available here, right? Turns out you can, simply using super dot and then whatever you want. Now you can see that actually simply, so the whole thing, both thing, you can see that Alex is only printed. When I print details, e dot details, then both things, name and details, both are printed. I just called details, right? But inside details, automatically I am calling super dot info also, which means that I super classes info method is also called, and then this thing is also called. And here there is no ordering required, like in any order you can do that, so that is fine. Okay, but this is a trick which can be used to call super classes methods. Okay, so something like this. Now in JavaScript, a class can only have a single superclass. No multiple inheritance is possible, which means that let's say you have two classes, and both classes methods you want to incorporate into one particular class, so you cannot do that. You can only do that like this, or let's say you can understand. So let's say something like this for simplicity. So let's say there is a class A, then you can make a new class B from A, that you can do, right? And rather again you can create a new child of B, which is C. Now C will have all the methods from A and B both. So this sort of thing is fine. But what is not possible is that, let's say A1 is some class and A2 is some class. I want to have B, which is having, like, which is inheriting from A1 also and A2 also, like both at once, right? Here you can see that B is having things from A and then only C is having things from B, right? So this sort of thing is possible, but this sort of thing is not possible, right? And that is called, this thing is a single inheritance, because every step you are just doing a single inheritance. This thing is called multiple inheritance, and this sort of thing is not allowed in most of the programming languages. No, sorry, especially in JavaScript it is not allowed. In some other programming languages also it is not allowed, like I believe in Java also multiple inheritance is not allowed. So, but there are ways to simulate it, and in JavaScript also there is sort of a way where you can simulate something like this, which is not exactly like that, but somehow you can achieve a similar thing, and they are called mixins. Mixins are also called abstract classes, and abstract classes are basically templates for classes. What is template for classes? Basically, abstract subclass means that you are trying to create a subclass, but you have not actually just created it. Just one step is left. It is a function. A mixin is, or abstract class is basically a function. It's a plain and simple function. It's a function where some class is passed as input, and it returns another subclass of that class as the output. Okay, so that is what it is. So you can understand that, let's say there is a class something like this, then when you create mixin, then you create a function. So this mixin is basically just a function which takes input as some class, and it returns another class. So you can understand that I could have written curly braces and then return this thing. This is essentially just an expression. So it is sort of, this is arrow function. So this is implicit return happening. And since this is a function expression, so this works fine, right? This works fine. So you can understand that input is some class, okay, and output is also some other class, but the output is a subclass. So you can see that class extends base, subclass of this given class, and then you can add any additional functionality. That should be fine, right? Let's try that out. So so in this case, let's say there is just this thing, right? And then you are having let's say const my mixin is equal to some base no need to add return curly braces, because okay, we can directly write something like class extends base. Base is a variable, you can understand. Base is a variable. Later we will see that that variable will be a class, but right now it's simply a variable. Okay, and now you can do anything here. So I can do whatever. So info, let's say log name, let's say this dot name or something. Okay, same as earlier. Okay, so this is fine. Now now where is the subclass? Where is the subclass? There is no subclass, right? Because I have not created subclass, and that's what mixin is. Mixin does not create a subclass. It's just it's sort of abstract subclass, which means that you need to call this mixin in order to create the subclass. So something like this. If you call this mixin with some class, so if I call my mixin with some class person, then the return value is a subclass, and that can be, let's say my person is some separate class. So now when I call this mixin, then I get a variable, I get the return. That returned value is a subclass, and now that subclass is like normal. So now const p is equal to, like any class you can call this, it should be new, right? And then plain and simple, you can pass whatever. So you can pass Alex, and you can simply print p dot name, and you can see that it's Alex. You can call p dot info, and still this also works. Why? Because p dot info is available because p is an instance of my person, not person, and my person is a subclass, and the subclass is created here. And subclass of which class? Subclass of person, because that person is now base, which means that when I called this my mixin, then it returned a class which is a subclass of person class, and that's why it works, right? So that should be fine. This is what the mixin is all about. Now you can understand that how we can use it in different manners. So let's say I can again use this as so wherever the classes can be used, this also can be used, right? So for example, right now I just created directly a subclass and used that subclass directly, right? But I can very well have something like this: class employee extends, and here some class will be there, right? And that class will be now this mixin. When it is called, then it gives a class. That class is which means that now this employee is a subclass of a class which is again a subclass of person. So this is how it is working, right? And what is the advantage? We'll see that one advantage soon, but right now just let's run it. So let's see. Let's see simply constructor. Constructor is not needed actually. Just we can simply add some other thing if you want. So let's say details, and the same thing. Let's just print details. Okay, so this should be fine. Okay, and then we can create E is equal to new employee. Let's say Alex is the name, and then log, and then we can see that e dot name is there. Apart from that, e dot info is there, and apart from that, e dot details is also there. Okay, so this is expected, right? Now let's get into a bit more deeper thing. So now what we can do is that instead of one mixin, we can create multiple mixins, isn't it? So let's say now this is some mixin 1, there is another mixin 2, and it has some different methods. So let's say called greet, and it prints, let's say, hello and the name of the person, not hello, hello. Okay, and and what I can do here is that you can understand that both are these two mixins are completely different thing. You understand? If you do something like this, then you just get a class with the functionality from person and info. Person and here info is there, right? So just the person class is there with the functionality, additional functionality with method info. If you do something like this, I'm just talking about only this thing, I'm not talking about right now all these things, I'm just talking about if you have only this thing, then this is just having functionality of info, additional functionality. If I use only this thing, then this class has an additional functionality of this greet, because that is all it added, right? That is all it added. But what if I do something like this, my mixin 1, you understand what now is happening is that I added functionality of greet, which means that now this is a subclass of person with added functionality of greet. But now again that subclass is passed to that mixin, this mixin, and then again we are also adding functionality info, because again we created another subclass, and it can be any order, right? It can be 2 1 also, so that will also work fine. Okay, now the thing is that now this thing can be used here, or you could have used directly also, but I'm saying that let's say again another subclass, something like this. Now you can understand that what is the advantage. Now, like, it is not multiple inheritance, but you can understand that some sort of like some sort of functionality from here also and from here also, both are now available in E, right? So e dot info is there, obviously, e dot details is there, obviously, but also e dot greet will be also there, right? Because that is also available in here, right? Apart from e.info and .greet. So you can see that apart from details, info and greet both are printed, because both are available, right? So that is how multiple mixins can be used to achieve something like that. Okay, so that should be fine. We learned almost most of the things about classes. In the next video, we are going to start with some other topic. Thanks a lot.